And I'll tell you why I hate Jordan Peterson. Not because of the content of what he says, but because of the way in which he led so many young people astray and is continuing to do so. He lured all these young people in with this silver-tongued discourse about Jung and Nietzsche while he was still an academic. And then I don't know what happened, with this treatment he received in Russia or something.
Yeah, very weird.
Oh, if the Orthodox Church worked on his head while he went under for a while, because the Jordan Peterson that came out the other end of that, who breaks down crying like every time he, starts to muse about Christ in his interviews, that's something's gone on with that guy, okay, since the time that he recorded university lectures. And all these young people who gravitated toward him magnetically in the early phase of his career as an academic, well, at least many of them, have now been funneled into fairly orthodox Christianity as a consequence of Peterson's own apparent conversion experience. And I know Steph mentioned he hadn't followed him too much in the past couple of years, but if you look at the past year or so, a year and a half or so of Peterson's interviews, you see the man has undergone some kind of conversion experience, okay?
Sorry, Jason, to interrupt, but what do you mean by conversion experience? Like he's like really adamantly Christian now?
Yes, he has. When he taught, he'll make remarks, again, while starting to cry. Okay, he'll make remarks about how it's important to save people from hell. He just doesn't want them to go to hell, and something's gone on in that guy's mind. Okay, a switch has flipped somewhere, and I've seen this before in the Middle Ages when we had the so-called Islamic Golden Age, which is a misnomer. This flourishing of science and technology innovation in Iran during the European Dark Ages. There were totally secular free thinkers like Razi, Omar Khayyam, who were reviving the knowledge and innovation of classical antiquity, the culture of Alexandria. And then at a certain point, some of these thinkers underwent this kind of process of grappling with cognitive dissonance that Peterson himself, I believe, has gone through. And you see it very clearly in someone like Al-Farabi, okay? Abu Nasr Farabi, who winds up trying to argue that Muhammad is some kind of Platonic philosopher king. And see, what happens is when you wind up in a state of cognitive dissonance, this has been analyzed. Before you get to that point where your reasoning capacity is totally destroyed because you simply accept on faith that two completely contradictory things are both true at the same time, before you get to that point, there's two psychological mechanisms that people tend to use to cope with their state of cognitive dissonance. One of them is to add a bunch of material to the subject matter that is dissonant or contradictory in order to have this filler or this glue or filler or gel somehow put these contradictory pieces together into a larger context that harmonizes them somewhat more, right? And this is like when you bring in Plato and Aristotle and Plotinus to try to smooth out the contradictions that are in the Gospels and in the Bible as a whole. You bring in extra stuff, right? And in Iran, they did this by bringing in ideas from Mithraism and Zoroastrianism in order to sort of make some more sense out of Islam and the Quran. And the cognitively dissonant structure that yielded was what we call Sufism. Okay, so you see Jordan Peterson doing this. He draws on Jung. He draws on, his knowledge of classical literature, and he draws on, the Enlightenment and so on and so forth in order to amalgamate things to the Bible to make more sense out of the message, say, of the Gospels than is actually there. That's one tactic. Another tactic of dealing with cognitive dissonance is focus on the platitudes. Forget the things in the message that are most diametrically and evidently contradictory, like for example, Jesus on the one hand saying, I'm here to affirm absolutely everything about the law and the prophets, and on the other hand, the Sermon on the Mount, right? Forget about the extremes of those. Forget about Jesus saying, don't resist evil, which means don't resist rapists, don't resist murderers, etc. And focus on the platitudes, like do unto others as you would want others to do unto you, golden rule and all this bullshit, right? And that way, okay, you de-emphasize the contradictions. Well, Peterson also does that, okay? So when you look at the way he handles the Bible, it's a combination of these two tactics for dealing with cognitive dissonance because as in the head as he is, he still hasn't gotten to the third stage yet, which is simply to accept the contradiction on faith, on blind faith, right? And admit that he has completely destroyed his rational faculty. But that's probably coming. We can look forward to that Jordan Peterson wandering the desert at some moment in the future.
Unless we bring him on BTR and have a sit down, because I don't think that the people who he's talking with, like,
by the way,
yeah,
I want to say something very important about that. By the way, okay. I was contacted in terms of bringing Jordan Peterson onto BTR, right?
Yeah.
Believe it or not, I hate to say this, but I really hate the guy. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you this. I was contacted by his publicist. The woman who claims that she kind of made Jordan Peterson, probably in this, this latest round where he has all the nice new suits and, clearly he's being managed. Okay. This woman wrote me like she starts off saying like, I'll keep it brief, whatever, and then she writes me like a 2-page letter and basically reveals the Jordan Peterson formula, which she expects that I should implement in my own media appearances. Right. And it starts off with her saying that every interview should be scripted. It shouldn't look like it's scripted, but all the questions need to be given to the interviewer in advance, and the interviewer is not allowed to deviate from those questions, and the responses to them should more or less be rehearsed. Okay? There's this part in there where she talks about injecting emotion and, personal anecdotes and whatever. And so I do have to wonder to some extent, like how much of it is actually his psychosis coming through when he's crying and how much of it is staged. Okay? And then she ends, and this is really colorful, by telling me that I should watch his series on the Bible and see where my ideas might fit in. Right?
Yeah.
So just be forewarned, right?
Yeah.
If you ever try to interview Peterson, you're probably going to get from like some managing agent the list of questions that you're allowed to ask him, right? And a heads up on what his responses are.
It, by the way, just as an aside, it does make me think that there may also be deeper levels to this as far as certain geopolitical things that are going on, as far as certain handlers that people may have that get them to say certain things and not others. At least I've noticed in certain high-profile interviews, certain things being said about what's going on right now with Russia and so on and so forth that kind of lead me in that direction. Like, hey, I wonder what's actually going on behind the scenes.